Good evening all, and welcome. I have some really big news. If you're a fan of my second channel, or Harry Potter or mobile games, it would really mean a lot to me if you'd go over to my second channel, at any point really, and check out the latest video I've released. But if that's not your thing, that's cool too. For now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. So, this is a story of something that happened to me and some friends when I was in high school. I have never shared this before. Since I've been thoroughly enjoying all the stories I've heard so far, I thought this would be the perfect place. I think I was in 10th grade. Me and 3 friends were smoking behind school. The school was about a 45-minute walk away from the neighbourhood where we all lived. It was a small high school town in Ontario, and it contained 2 large high schools and a bunch of medium-sized elementary/middle schools. It's common knowledge that with every small town when you're young, the main problem is that there's nothing to do within it except party and run around the streets acting like idiots. And that's what we did most of the time. But I went through phases when I was 13 to 15, where I just went to parks and school with friends and smoked or drank. This particular night was just a smoke. In the middle of our session, a car pulled around back of the middle of the school that we were smoking at. A man got out of the car and began walking towards us. It was dark enough, and the car was far away enough that we couldn't make out faces. But as 14 to 15-year-old kids, we thought it was an adult coming to bust us for smoking. So naturally, we ran away through a field over a fence and up a small street with a few houses, and back onto the main road that would lead us home. This was the main road that ran into the middle of the entire town. As we were walking down the main road on the sidewalk, we passed by a convenience store on the right-hand side. This was at one point the only convenience store in town that sold cheap candy. Cheap, assorted, 5 cents per piece candy. We used to always come to this store as younger kids to buy it, so we were all very familiar with this part of town. So we treaded along with confidence, not even thinking twice about the person that we had just ran from. In our town, this was a normal occurrence. We were teenagers, loitering, and someone was coming to tell us to go away. So we did. End of story? No. Just as we were walking by Daisy Mart, headlights from that car lit up and blinked at us from an alleyway in between a concrete wall and the convenience store. The ignition started, and the car sped up towards us with considerable speed, so we ran out of the way. We looked back and realized it was the same car from the school. The car pulled out of the convenience store alley, but it turned the opposite direction of which we were walking. We thought it was just a creepy coincidence, but about 10 minutes later, the same car drove past us, and from tinted windows, we heard someone in the car say, "We're still coming for you," and it drove off past us, up the road and out of sight. We were a little freaked out at this point, so we hurried along. The main road we were on eventually turned into a pretty sizable bridge, which loomed over a small river and pretty large forested area. On occasion, in the local news, you'd hear about children getting lost in the forested area, so it wasn't small by any means. So we all agreed to head under the bridge and take refuge to throw the guys who were trying to follow us off our tail. So we hung out under the bridge, probably for about 30 minutes, talking, smoking, and mildly shaken up, but pretty much laughing it off. This was creepy to us, but nothing to be alarmed about. As mentioned, we were kids in a small town. We were used to getting up to no good and having to run from the authorities. This was just another day. Our confidence was overinflated, and we never got caught. We lived in an area with so many small connecting streets and parks. Running and hiding after creating mischief was something that came second nature. We confidently headed back up the bridge to continue our walk home after the mentioned time. Now I'll explain this bridge. It was a long bridge, 4 lanes, 2 going in either direction. No room for a car to stop and wait. No designated parking lanes. It was somewhat of a mini highway. The bridge is also steep, so the middle of the bridge, which was also the area with the footpath that led to the forest, was the lowest point. There was absolutely no way any car could park anywhere on or near this bridge to idle and wait for us to come up from under the bridge. Not to mention that the car was nowhere in plain sight, and we decided to go under it in the first place. But after 2 minutes of walking, the car came up from behind us, and a man from inside the car said to us, "You thought you could get away from us? We'll always find you." So the car took off once again, but we decided to as well. Once we crossed the bridge, it led us back to our neighborhood. To stress the point again, the neighborhood we lived in contained many connected streets and many sections of homes and parks, a pretty large suburban area. If you didn't know where you were going, you could probably get lost pretty easily. So we ran to the closest, biggest park where no cars would be able to get into. One street was visible from the park, but since it was the middle of the night, if you were driving by the park, it would be hard to make out anyone in the park. So that's probably why we never saw the same car that had been following us drive by the park. It didn't stop this time. So since the park was literally in the middle of the neighborhood, we wished each other good luck, and we all took off in different directions to our respective homes. We each only lived 2 minutes away at this point, and we all made it home safely. So I've been living in Paris for the last 8 months, and have felt relatively comfortable with my surroundings. I was coming home from a club on the first train that goes to my town. This is around 5:30 a.m. Note, I was quite drunk and tired and just wanted to sleep, and I was wearing clothes for going out. There was this guy on the platform who tried to talk to me. I walk over, trying to reach the next train car over, but failed. There were 2 open seats left, so I sit in one of them, and he decides to sit in the one across from me. So he starts telling me, "I really want to marry you. I don't even want to do you or anything. I just want to be your one and only. Please, will you do the pleasure of becoming my wife?" As he's saying this, he is caressing my thigh. I am genuinely uncomfortable and try to sink down into my chair. I'm just like, "No, I'm not interested. I have a boyfriend," which is the truth. So he resorts to saying, if you had one, he would be here with you taking you home. Now, my boyfriend lives 5 hours away, close to the border between France, Germany, and Switzerland, so he could not be there. I explained to him, and he says that he's not a good boyfriend to leave me here. He then says that he's a nice guy and has money and can take care of me. I told him I wasn't interested. Then I get to my stop and he follows me out. After he begs for me to go back to his place, he continues talking to me and I start shivering because I didn't bring a jacket. He sees this and forcibly puts his jacket on me. He says that I'm not feeling well and that he'll walk me home, although I beg him not to. He tries to talk to other people to get him on his side. We reach this one lady who saw my discomfort on the train. We explain both of our sides to her for about 2 hours. I kid you not. She finally says, since you're not her boyfriend, you can't walk her home. I will. I was so thankful to her. We left, and she had to take her bus to work. I thought I was safe, but sadly no. So I start walking to my apartment. I live about 10 minutes away from the station, and I was about halfway there when I heard a whistle. I turned back, and lo and behold, it's the creep. He runs up to me and continues to say the same crap and begs for my number. He does all of this while he's caressing my face. I slap his hand and tell him if he doesn't stop, I'll hurt him. He continues, so I threaten to call the police. Only then does he scamper off. I got home at around 8:39 and cried my eyes out. Creepy sudden marriage proposal, dude? Please, let's not meet again. I was 16, coming home from a friend's house. While I was getting on the train, this man was following me. He was perhaps 45 to 50 and didn't speak English all that well, but well enough that I could understand him. So I was getting on the bus, and like a lot of people, there's nothing to make him stand out. Well, I go to sit down, and he sits right down next to me, which was unsettling because there were other open seats, but I'm not new to creepy people in public places, so I just stayed there. I was by myself, and it was about 6 p.m. at this time in the winter, and I live in Midwestern USA, and so it was already dark out. Then this man starts talking to me, and I was in the corner seat, so I couldn't move unless he got out of his seat, or I just went over to him. He starts off talking to me about where I'm going, and I say that I'm going to meet some friends, as I didn't want him to think that I was going home and follow me. I thought it was strange for him to ask me where I was going, and I was already paranoid as heck. Then he asks me for a hug. I say no. And then he goes on to tell me he needs a hug because his wife just died and he's sad. I started ignoring him at this point, and he goes on to say that his daughter also just died. He starts making up stuff, and I'm ignoring him. After about 20 minutes I get off the train, and I'm super thankful to get away from this strange man. That's not the end though. The man got off at the exact same stop. At this point I was waiting for the bus to come to bring me to my final destination, and the man gets off and follows me to the bus stop. Waiting for the bus with perhaps 2 other people and this man, he doesn't approach me. But as the bus pulls up, he comes and puts his arms around me and tells the other people that this is his girlfriend, referring to me. No one really said anything, and we got into the bus, and I started getting super nervous and grabbed my phone from my bag, in case I needed to call 911 or something, if this man kept following me. He again sits by me, but I don't sit where I'm trapped in this time. He starts saying he can walk me to my friends so that I can get there safely, and I respectfully decline. Then he says, I'm going to take you to your friends, so that he was verified that he was indeed going to follow me. Which sucks, because I wasn't actually meeting friends, I was going to my house. I start panicking, and want to call my mum to pick me up from the bus stop instead of walking there, and to my luck, my phone is dead. It's dark, I'm alone, my phone's dead, and some weird-ass dude is trying to follow me. He continues to talk to me, but I don't even know what it's about. And the bus was empty at this point besides just us and the driver, and one other guy. And bless the other guy's soul. I kept looking over at the other guy very intensely, and the panic really started setting up, and I was not answering any conversations with the weirdo anymore. The other man comes up and tells the weirdo to leave me alone, or he's going to call the cops, and that I clearly don't want to talk. At this point, the weirdo gets very aggressive and is telling him to fight him and cussing him out and all this stuff. Then the next stop comes and the other man physically removes this weirdo from the bus. I was so happy. I thanked the man so much, and luckily it ended well. It was still very uncomfortable, and seeing how aggressive this guy got, I doubt his intentions were good. This happened a few summers ago, when I was living in Montreal. I lived in Mile End and worked in Plateau, two adjacent neighborhoods that were usually full of tourists, students, and people just hanging out. I walked to and from work through a series of pretty tree-lined alleyways that were peaceful and quiet and full of cats. Anyone familiar with this area will know the kind of alleyways I am talking about. I always felt safe because there were so many people hanging out on their back balconies overlooking the alleys in the summertime. Occasionally, I ran into people strolling with their dogs, or kids messing around, or drunk dudes would catcall from their balconies. But typically, my walk to and from work were uneventful. That is, until this day. I left work at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon and began my walk home. After I crossed Mont Royal, a main street, I could pretty much take one long alleyway all the way home. So that's what I did. I didn't use headphones or anything. I was just walking and daydreaming and taking in the beautiful summer afternoon. I didn't sense that a single thing was off, and I walked for about 5 to 10 minutes before I heard someone yelling from their balcony up ahead. My French is pretty bad, and they were far up, so I didn't catch any specifics. I ignored it and kept walking, and 2 minutes later, this big guy comes bursting out of his back gate into the alley, talking hurriedly to me in French. When he realized that I'm Anglo, he switches to English and says quietly, "There's someone following you. He came into the alley behind you and has been ducking behind garages and garbage cans. We could see him from our porch." He points up to where his companion is still sitting, a few stories up on a small balcony, with a pretty good view of down the alleyway. I was hesitant and said that it must just be someone walking their dog or something, and that I hadn't seen or noticed anyone behind me. I really didn't know how to make any sense of the situation, but I thought he must be mistaken. The man shakes his head and yells down the alleyway, "Get the hell out of here," or something to that effect. But nothing interesting happens. Nobody appears. So he starts striding down the way I came, when all of a sudden a man stands up from where he was hiding, ducked behind the wall of someone's garage. He was skinny, had long brown scraggly hair, and a leather jacket on, even though it was about 30 Celsius outside. I made eye contact with him for a split second, before he took off running back down the alleyway, and he had these wild, angry eyes that still give me chills. The balcony Samaritan booked it after him, but the guy was gone just like that. We weren't sure what to do, or what we even could say to the police. So balcony Samaritan walked me onto Park Avenue, which is close to a main road, and I thanked him profusely for saving me from whatever the alley stalker had planned for me that afternoon. It still scares the crap out of me that I didn't sense a single thing was off, and didn't have a feeling of being watched. Nothing. This story takes place when I was 17 years old. It was the summer between my junior and senior year of high school. I had just gotten my license and car, and finally gotten my first taste of adult freedom. So, naturally, I abused it. I would sneak out at night and go hang out with boys in the neighboring town, and come back in the early hours of the morning. I felt pretty badass, to say the least. One night, I was driving home at around 2 a.m. To get back from my neighboring town, you have to drive through our old military base. It's not abandoned or anything, and has multiple businesses and banks, and there is a section of it with light-up signs to a walking trail. This little area has a small lot for people to park their cars while they run, bike, or whatever they wish to do on the trail. As I drive on base, I see a car in the lot. I admittedly don't know anything about makes or models of cars, but I can tell you that it was a car, and that it was black. Its lights are on, and when I drive past it, it leaves the lot and begins to follow me. I didn't consciously think too much of this, as I assumed it was just some teenagers smoking or fooling around that got spooked by my car passing through. As I approached the lights that led into my city, I put my blinker on to turn right, and so does the car behind me. Again, I did not think much of this, as to get to a large portion of my city, you need to make a right turn at said light. Now at this point, there are absolutely no other cars on the road. It was very late at night, and my city goes dead after about 11 p.m. So after checking in my rear view and making sure the plates were not a cop's, I start to speed to get home quicker, going around 10 over the legal limit. As I do this, so does the car behind me. At this point, I start to feel uneasy. I continue to speed up, and so does the car. When turning onto my street, there is a left turning lane to get into. I decide in a split-second decision to just turn onto my road without slowing down or turning on my blinkers, to see what the car would do. They did not initially follow, and as I approached my house, I still felt like something was off. Sure enough, the car had turned around to continue following me down my road. I started to freak out. I knew that I was being followed. I'm a little 17-year-old blonde girl in a Mini Cooper with no self-defense, and I can't call my parents because then they would know I snuck out, and I can't call the police because it was past 9, as it's illegal to without an enhanced license before you turn 18 in NYS, and I was terrified to get a ticket. I couldn't even go downtown to the police station, as there were too many stops and lights that I didn't want to be stuck in with this person. So I call my aunt, who lives around 5 to 10 minutes from my house, and start driving in her direction. The car obviously follows, and my aunt says to come to her house as fast as I can, and she would be out there with her pit bull, Belle, who is a sweetheart but looks like she could kill someone. As I'm driving up the country road to her house, I speed faster and faster, and the car continues to match my speed. I ended up going at about 100, and they do the same. I go into fight or flight mode, and I push my car to as fast as it would take me, as I go up the final hill to my aunt's house, and had a fast and furious tire screeching moment, as I quite literally whipped into my aunt's development. I could not see the car following me down the hill because I was going so fast. I immediately run into her house. When I arrive, we lock all the doors and windows, and she goes to bed after 10 minutes. But I stay up, adrenaline still rushing. From her guest bedroom, you can see out into the street. I kept peeping through the windows to make sure the car did not come back. To my horror, a few minutes after my aunt went to bed, I saw the same car slowly circling the neighborhood, briefly slowing down outside my aunt's house, presumably once they saw my car. Luckily, they did not stop and left the neighborhood after that. I don't think I've ever been more scared in my life. My city is small, and I did not recognize the car, so I truly do not believe it was a prank. I wish I had called the police or gotten plates, but I wasn't thinking straight, and I'm glad nothing bad happened that night, and that whoever was driving the car did not catch up to me, or God knows what they wanted to do. I might be overreacting, but I plead and hope to never meet the driver or occupant of that car ever again. This all happened about 4 years ago. I had been to a party, and it ended past midnight, and my mother was out of town, so she couldn't come and collect me. I was home alone. So I walked home with a female friend, and it wasn't a dangerous place, so we weren't afraid. We were talking and laughing, of course not very loudly, but we weren't drunk or anything. Then we turned a corner and saw a woman, mid-height, who was covering almost all her body except for her eyes. We didn't pay a lot of attention to her, because we didn't want to provoke her or anything. About 15 minutes passed, and I felt something odd. So we turned around, and I saw the same woman trying to hide in a wall. It didn't work out well for her because I could recognize her almost immediately. I messaged my friend about it, so the woman didn't notice I'd seen her. We started to panic a little, and we accelerated our pace. My friend and I were supposed to stay at my house for a sleepover, and after 20 minutes, when we arrived at my house, and as I was trying to open the door, my friend screamed really loudly, "There she is!" and she pushed me to get into the house. We were really, really, really afraid, so we dialed 911. I went to drink some water, and I heard someone who was trying to break into the house by the window at the kitchen. You couldn't have opened the window easily, but somehow she did. I told my friend to go to my room and contact the police from there. I grabbed a knife and hid behind the door of the kitchen. I saw her entering my house, and I wanted to throw up because I was really nervous and sweating. I had a shot of adrenaline and shouted as loudly as possible, "Get the hell out of my house," with a knife in hand. She screamed and went out the window. I thought she was on drugs or something. The police arrived in a few minutes, but couldn't do anything to identify the woman because she wore gloves. When my mum came home, we brought an alarm and everything. Please, please, always carry pepper spray, and dial 911 if you feel something's odd while walking on the street. Never underestimate a situation. I had been eyeing up these snow boots from Target for a few weeks, and finally had enough to buy them. I got them, and then went over to my friend's house with them to show her. She lives directly across the street from me, so it's maybe a 30-second walk door to door. I hung out over there for a while, and then at around 10:30 decided to go home, since I had to take the bus to class very early next morning. It was trash night, so I went inside, grabbed a full bag and went out to the garage door and took it out to the curb. I heard some crunching in the leaves in my yard, but it was dark, and I just figured it was an animal. I went back in for the recycling bin, and when I put it at the curb, a man approached me. He asked for directions to a nearby street, so I told him. He then leaned in and whispered in my ear, "I'm going to do things to you." It was very clear he had sexual assault on his mind. I took off running towards the house, tripped on my snow boots, and fell into the garage. He was behind me, but I got inside and locked the interior garage door before he got to me. I heard him messing around in the garage. I ran upstairs and told my mum what happened. We called 911 and I spoke to the dispatcher. While my mum found something that could be used as a weapon and went to see if he was still in there. He wasn't, so she closed the garage door and we waited for the police. The officers drove around looking for him for a bit. Then they came to my house to talk to me. They didn't find him. About a week later, I was on the bus and saw him. He looked right at me, but the way he acted was like he didn't recognize me. I called my friend to come and meet me at the bus stop by the house, and we walked back to her house and called the police again. They came out, but still didn't find him. Probably one of the scariest times of my life. Oh, and I ended up throwing the snow boots away. I just couldn't wear them after that. This was back in October of 2018, when I had accompanied my mum to a clinic in a small town about an hour away from Frankfurt. I'm in my late 20s and female. We were there for about 2 weeks, while my mum underwent treatment for cancer. Unfortunately, soon after arriving, she experienced a lot of pain in her leg, and we later found out that the cancer had spread there, and her leg could break at any wrong step. This meant if we were going to see anything, I had to go alone. This was fine, as the town we were in was extremely small and filled mostly with the old and sick. There was a larger town only a few miles away, and over a fairly steep hill, and a large park in between. It was about noon, and my mum wasn't going to need me to be around, so I decided to go for a walk around the park. To get there, I just had to walk down the path, cross a street lined with inns and cafes on the side leading to the park. There are twisting paths, cross bridges over each other, a lot of benches, a couple fountains, and 1 or 2 community buildings. I chose a path that would take me right beside an underground fountain, about as deep as my shoulder, with steps leading down to the spout. It was there I first saw him. I was heading almost directly towards the fountain, when a man's head pops up, looking directly at me. I looked back at him for a second, thinking I had surprised him just as much, and we do the normal look away quickly thing. I was the only one who looked away. When I looked back, I realized he was still watching me. Then I noticed he had one arm crossed over his chest and moving, as though he were touching himself. As soon as I realized this, I looked away and changed my direction in order to give him a wider berth. I was stunned and in disbelief that I convinced myself that whatever he was doing had nothing to do with me, and that as long as I kept walking, he would go back to being weird all by himself. I turned down a path that, for the immediate area, was wide open. I was still close to the cafes and inns, and the occasional other person also taking a midday walk. I was almost to an area that would take the path through patches of woods, which would also take me out of the public eye, when I looked back to see if the guy was still in the fountain, but he was gone. Surprised, I quickly did a circle and noticed he'd taken off, doing a wide loop that left a lot of opportunity for our paths to cross again if I didn't change direction. Once again, I couldn't believe it. I thought, it's the middle of the day. We're in a quiet but not unpopulated town about a mile away from a larger one. There's no one here but old and sick people. There's no way a predator would be here, now, and hunting me. But I still stopped and decided to change directions again. This time, my dumbass decided to take a tiny path that would lead me to the base of the hill, that would go over the larger town, and was heavily wooded. I get up to where the trees started, and decide to look again. That's when I noticed that he'd also changed his direction, and was practically jogging away from me. I looked back up the path, and realized that continuing would leave me completely alone and vulnerable, and even though I didn't know where it led, I had a fairly good idea that the path the guy was jogging up would eventually connect to this path in the woods, because they all did. So I stood at the end of the path and waited until the guy was out of sight, before I turned around and headed in the opposite direction, through the grass of a pretty wide open portion of the park. I got to where I was a safe distance away, and pulled out my phone to start recording myself. I figured I would just make it look like I was video chatting with someone. This was when I was shown without a doubt that this guy was after me, because not long after I made it across the park, but to where I could still see the path up the hill, he comes down the very same path, looking side to side, looking for me. He eventually spots me again, as I had very bright dyed red hair and was pretty easy to spot in such a wide open area. It's at this point I feel safe enough because there are people nearby, and I'm within running distance from the town should this guy look towards me. I keep wandering around, testing to see how far this guy will go. He keeps following me, trying to stay out of sight, because at one point I quickly turn around, suddenly, to watch him sprint back into the trees, until eventually I go up a hill that has zero cover for him to use, and I lose track of him. I continued on to explore a different small town, making sure that I was always in a public space and easily seen, but I never saw him again. Trust your gut. My head was telling me there was no way this could be happening to me, and I almost tested it by walking up in the woods, but my gut screamed bad idea, and I couldn't be more relieved that I listened. Trust your gut. Back in community college, I rode the bus to and from college. The bus stop was walking distance to my house, so it was a huge help for me. When I am on the bus, I always listen to music and look outside, never at my phone, never at anyone else. I guess that's how I never noticed the man constantly looking at me. One day I went through to go to the computer, to memes and chat with my boyfriend through Facebook. The dude pulls up a chair next to me and sits down looking at my memes and says hi. He startled me immediately. Then he went on to say, "Hey beautiful, I thought I'd come by and say hi. I see you on the bus a lot and thought you might want some company, you know?" Me. My hair is messed up, my nose is congested, and I'm sleepy as hell. Who are you?" "I'm Jack, and I think you're pretty." I've got to go to class now." I leave, but not heading to class in case he followed me. He follows, and then turns around a bit, and leaves. After college, the dude shows up at my bus stop at the exact same time my class ends, and waits for me, and says the same stuff as last time. He repeats this for about a week, until I finally tell the bus driver. This dude is following me, and it's creeping me out very much. Me and the bus driver are cool, you see. And the bus driver closes the door and drives off, leaving behind the creepy dude before he had any opportunity to get in. The creepy guy starts telling his classmates how he's going to get laid soon. The only reason why I know this is because one of his classmates is my best friend. I pointed out to him who my creepy stalker was, and my friend told me that he keeps talking about how he attempted to hook up with a chick and maybe will get laid soon. In your dreams, moron. I cussed him out next time he appeared at the end of my class. He said he was sorry, baby. I won't do it again. Dumbass, I'm not your baby. Now piss off or I'll call the police. I'm serious, I don't even know who you are. The cool teacher hears our conversation and has a discussion with him privately, and he leaves me alone forever. I was 14 years old at the time. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was in a bus coming home, as I spent the morning running with friends in the park. So I was on the bus, listening to music, and looking outside through the window, when I just checked the inside of the bus to see how many stops I had left. As I scanned the bus, I eye contact with a guy who's about 23 to 25. I immediately looked at the window again, and I just felt him staring at me. Every time I checked, he was looking at me. I was very uncomfortable, and it was like that for 30 minutes. The bus finally arrived at my stop, and prayed with all my heart that he didn't go down now. At the bus stop, I saw him get up about 20 seconds after me, so I started walking faster, but he followed me and started talking to me. Hi, how are you? You're beautiful. I begin to walk faster. How old are you? You're pretty. I whisper, 14. He tried to talk to me. We walked by a group of people who stopped to talk about whatever they promote or defend. A woman came to talk to me and started explaining her thing. The guy backed up a little, and after 30 seconds he tried to speak to me again, and I told him, I'm already talking to someone. He backed up and waited. At this point the girl asked me if I knew the guy. I was shaking and said no, and that he had been following me since the bus. He called one of her colleagues, and her colleague, bless her, started screaming and shaming him for harassing a 14-year-old girl. As she yelled at him, I thanked the other girl and started running to my home. I ran for 20 minutes. I had tears, and when I finally arrived at my apartment and closed the door, I was shaking and crying. But I was very glad those girls were there, and that I was finally safe. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. First off, I want to give a huge thank you to my amazing patrons who you can see on screen now. If you'd like to become a patron also, feel free to check out the link in the description to have your name on this list very soon. Now, what I was talking to you about at the start of the video, as some of you may know, I have a second channel where I talk about all stuff Harry Potter, but more specifically about their upcoming game, Wizards Unite, which I'm extremely excited about. I've just made a new video over there, and if you'd like to support my second channel, or are quite interested, or just want a face reveal, you can go over there and check that out. It would really mean a lot to me, but even if you don't, that's fine too. Sorry about last night also. I was recording this video, I got to about halfway, but I really wasn't feeling well. I still have a slight sore throat, and I was just getting so exhausted I was almost falling asleep recording it. So I thought, it's probably best to call it a night. My throat was hurting, and I knew that if I just kept on working through the night, I'd be really, really tired, and you know, there's a chance that I could make a hiccup on editing and edit the video not so well, which is stuff I really don't want to do. So I hope that you guys didn't mind, and thank you to everyone who checked out Killer Orange Cat. He really is a Great guy, a gentleman, and if you haven't seen him before, well, I'd recommend him and you can check him out. If there's a story that you wish to share, feel free to send it to my Reddit or my email. All info is in the description. And before you go, don't forget to drop some love, leave a comment down below, or drop a like, and subscribe to keep up to date with all new stories every night, and press the bell icon to not miss your nightly spooks. But anyway, for now guys, I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.